I am Tina, 32 years old, and I never thought a Christmas dinner could change everything. The warmth of the fireplace contrasted with the cold stares I received walking through my childhood home. After 5 years away, I returned with hope and expensive gifts, expecting a loving reunion. Instead, I witnessed the ultimate betrayal that awakened something inside me. Before I tell you how my family forgot me on Christmas, drop a comment where you're watching from and subscribe to see more stories about finding your worth. My relationship with my family was complicated from the beginning. Growing up in suburban Boston, I was the youngest of 3 children and the only daughter. My parents, Margaret and Richard, had always placed incredibly high expectations on all of us, but somehow their expectations for me always seemed impossible to meet. While their affection was consistently sparse, my 2 older brothers, Noah and Ethan, were the golden children. Noah, the eldest, followed our father's footsteps into law, while Ethan became a successful architect. They could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Every achievement of theirs was celebrated with dinner parties and expensive gifts. When Noah got into Harvard Law, my parents threw a lavish party, inviting nearly everyone in our social circle. When Ethan won his first design competition, they framed the newspaper article and hung it prominently in our living room. My childhood was different. I was constantly compared to my brothers or to my mother's friends' daughters. Why can't you be more like Noah? He never got anything less than an A. Or look at Caroline Thompson. She plays 3 instruments and still manages to be class president. No matter what I achieved, it was never enough. I still remember when I was 16 and won first place in a national science competition. I rushed home, trophy in hand, bursting with excitement to share my news. When I walked through the door, my parents were in the living room discussing Ethan's new job offer. "Mom, Dad, guess what?" I interrupted, unable to contain my excitement. My mother glanced at me briefly. "Not now, Tina. We're discussing something important. But I won the national science competition. First place." I held up my trophy. "That's nice, honey," my father said distractedly. "Did you hear what firm offered Ethan a position?" That was the moment something broke inside me. I realized that in their eyes, my achievements would always be secondary. That night, I made a promise to myself that one day they would have to acknowledge me. Throughout high school, I threw myself into my studies, particularly computer science and business. I was determined to build something they couldn't ignore. When college acceptance letters came, I received a full scholarship to MIT. But even that momentous achievement was overshadowed by Noah's engagement announcement that same weekend. At my graduation from MIT, my family attended, but left early because my father had an important golf game. No celebration dinner, not even a proper congratulations. Just a quick good job from my mother before they hurried away. That was the day I decided to distance myself. I moved to San Francisco, declined their half-hearted invitations for holidays, and limited our communication to occasional phone calls. I needed space to build my life without their constant judgment. For 5 years, I worked relentlessly, starting as a software engineer at a tech company before launching my own startup. Those years were tough. I lived in a tiny apartment, worked 18-hour days, and poured everything I had into my company. All the while, my family remained largely oblivious to my struggles or successes. My mother would call occasionally, but our conversations were superficial, filled with updates about Noah's perfect children or Ethan's latest design project, never really asking about my life. When my company began to gain traction, securing our first major clients and attracting investor interest, I didn't share the news with them. Why bother? They had never cared before. Then last month, something unexpected happened. My mother called, her voice unusually warm, and invited me home for Christmas. "The whole family will be here," she said. "We miss you, Tina. It's time to come home." She mentioned that things had changed, that they'd been reflecting on our relationship and wanted to make amends. Against my better judgment, hope flickered inside me. Perhaps they had finally recognized their behavior. Maybe they were ready to truly see me. With that fragile hope, I accepted the invitation, deciding to give them one last chance. Once I decided to return home for Christmas, I wanted to make it special. Despite our strained relationship, I wanted to show my family that I had become successful and generous. I spent weeks selecting the perfect gifts for each family member, gifts that would show I paid attention to their interests despite the distance between us. For my mother, I chose a platinum and diamond bracelet from Tiffany's, similar to one she had pointed out in a magazine when I was a teenager. She had sighed then, saying, "Your father would never spend that kind of money on jewelry." Now I could give her that dream gift myself. I spent $3,000 on it, not including the custom engraving. For my father, I found a rare vintage Omega watch at an auction. He had always been fascinated by timepieces, though he only owned a few modest ones. This particular watch was from the 1960s, the era he always reminisced about as the Golden Age. It cost me $5,000, but I knew it would be something truly special that he couldn't dismiss. For Noah and his family, I arranged an all-expenses-paid 2-week trip to Italy. Noah had always talked about wanting to take his wife Julia and their children to Europe, but with 3 kids and his demanding job, they had never prioritized it. The package included luxury accommodations, private tours, and even a personal photographer for family portraits in front of the Colosseum. This gift set me back nearly $20,000. For Ethan, who had recently mentioned wanting to expand his architectural firm but lacking the capital, I prepared a check for $50,000 as seed money. I also commissioned a renowned artist to create a scale model of his first major building design, something I knew would touch him on a personal level. As I wrapped each gift, I couldn't help but wonder if they would finally see me differently. Would these tangible demonstrations of my success and thoughtfulness finally earn their respect, or at least their acknowledgement? The week before Christmas, I boarded a first-class flight from San Francisco to Boston. As the plane took off, anxiety and anticipation fought for dominance in my mind. Part of me was excited at the prospect of reconciliation, while another part remained guarded, remembering countless disappointments. During the 6-hour flight, I rehearsed conversations in my head, imagining different scenarios of how my family might react to seeing me after so long. Would they be warm and welcoming, or would they treat me with the same dismissive attitude I remembered? I ordered a glass of champagne to calm my nerves, then another, trying to quiet the doubts swirling in my mind. When we landed, I collected my luggage and headed to the rental car counter. I had reserved a black Tesla M01 DUS No, knowing it would make an impression when I pulled into my parents' driveway. It was an indulgence, but I wanted that moment of recognition when they saw me emerge from a luxury vehicle that I had paid for myself. The drive from Logan Airport to my childhood home in Wellesley took about 40 minutes. As familiar landmarks appeared, memories flooded back, both good and bad. The ice cream shop, where my father would occasionally take us on summer evenings. The park, where my mother would read, while ignoring my attempts to show her the structures I built in the sandbox. The high school, where I spent 4 years feeling invisible despite being at the top of my class. When I finally turned onto my parents' street, I felt my heart rate accelerate. Their house looked exactly as I remembered it. A colonial-style home with perfect landscaping and tasteful Christmas decorations. No gaudy inflatable Santas or flashing lights for the Caldwell family, only elegant wreaths and subtle white lights that signaled refined taste to anyone passing by. I parked behind Noah's Range Rover and Ethan's BMW, taking a moment to collect myself before gathering the carefully wrapped presents from the trunk. The weight of the gifts in my arms felt like armor as I walked up the stone path to the front door. Standing there, I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell, the same chime I had heard thousands of times growing up. As I waited for someone to answer, I straightened my posture and put on a confident smile. Whatever happened inside this house, I was no longer the overlooked little girl desperate for approval. I was Tina Caldwell, a successful businesswoman who had built something meaningful on her own terms. The door swung open, and for the first time in 5 years, I stood face to face with my past. The door opened to reveal my mother, Margaret, looking exactly as I remembered her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, impeccable makeup, and a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. For a split second, her eyes widened in what looked like genuine surprise, as if she hadn't actually expected me to come. "Tina," she said, her voice carrying that familiar, controlled tone, "you're here." No warm embrace, no exclamations of joy, just a polite acknowledgement of my presence. She stepped aside to let me in, her gaze dropping to the pile of gifts in my arms. "My, you've brought quite a lot." "It's Christmas," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "And it's been a while." As I stepped into the foyer, the house smelled exactly as it always had during the holidays: cinnamon, pine, and the faint scent of my mother's expensive perfume. The familiarity was both comforting and unsettling. My father appeared from his study, looking older than I remembered. His hair had more gray, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. He approached with a hesitant smile, clearly uncomfortable. "Tina," he said, awkwardly patting my shoulder. "Good to see you. The drive from the airport okay?" "It was fine, Dad. I rented a car." I gestured toward the Tesla outside. "H looks expensive," he commented, though I couldn't tell if he was impressed or disapproving. Before I could respond, the sound of children's laughter echoed from the living room, and moments later, Noah appeared with his family. His wife Julia gave me a polite smile, while their 3 children, Madison, 8, Thomas, 6, and Emma, 4, stared at me with curiosity. "Aunt Tina," Madison exclaimed, clearly having been prepped for my arrival. "Daddy showed us your picture." Noah stepped forward, giving me a brief, one-armed hug. "Hey, little sis. You look good. Silicon Valley must be treating you well." There was an undercurrent to his words, something between surprise and assessment, as though he was mentally calculating my success based on my appearance. "It's San Francisco, actually," I corrected him gently. "And yes, things are going well." Julia approached, her designer outfit and perfectly highlighted hair, making it clear she had fully embraced the Caldwell family aesthetic. "Tina, it's so nice to finally meet you. Noah talks about you sometimes. The emphasis on sometimes wasn't lost on me." Little Emma, the youngest, tugged at my coat. "Are you really my aunt? I never saw you before." Her innocent comments stung more than any cold greeting from my parents. I knelt down to her level. "Yes, I am. And I'm sorry I haven't been around, but I'm here now. Would you like to help me put these presents under the tree?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, her face lighting up at the mention of presents. As we moved toward the living room, Ethan emerged from the kitchen with a glass of wine. His face broke into what seemed like a genuine smile. "Tina," he exclaimed, approaching for a real hug. "It's about time you came home." Of all my family members, Ethan had always been the most supportive, though our contact had also dwindled over the years. "It's good to see you, Ethan," I said, meaning it. He helped me with some of the presents, whispering, "Fair warning. Mom's been on edge planning everything. Dad's firm lost a big client last month, and Noah's been insufferable about his latest promotion." I appreciated the insider information, though it did little to ease the tension I felt. The pre-Christmas dinner that evening was an exercise in strained politeness. We sat around the dining table that had witnessed countless family meals, the fine china and crystal glasses reflecting the warm light from the chandelier above. My mother had prepared her famous roast beef with all the trimmings, a meal that had always signified special occasions in our household. Throughout dinner, the conversation flowed around me rather than including me. My mother dominated the discussion, focusing on Noah's recent promotion to partner at his law firm. "The youngest partner in the firm's history," she boasted, refilling his wine glass. "We always knew you were destined for greatness." Julia chimed in with stories about the children's accomplishments, Madison's piano recital, Thomas's soccer trophies, the advanced reading program Emma had been placed in. When Ethan mentioned his firm's new project designing a community center, my father finally perked up. "That's excellent, son. Visibility on projects like that can really elevate your firm's profile." I waited for a natural opening to share something about my life, and when there was finally a lull in the conversation, I spoke up. "I've had some exciting developments with my company, too. We're launching a new platform next quarter that's already attracting a lot of attention in the industry." My mother nodded distractedly. "That's nice, dear. Oh, Julia, did you tell Tina about the charity gala you chaired last month? It was written up in Boston Magazine." And just like that, the conversation shifted away from me again. I caught Ethan giving me an apologetic look across the table, but he didn't intervene. As dessert was served, my father briefly asked, "So, this company of yours, is it making any money yet? Tech startups are risky business." Before I could answer with the truth that we had secured major funding and were projecting 8-figure revenues for the coming year, my mother interrupted. "Richard, business talk is hardly appropriate for Christmas Eve Eve. Let's keep things festive." She turned to Noah's wife. Julia, would you help me bring in coffee? Throughout the evening, I noticed that little Emma kept watching me with curious eyes. When the adults moved to the living room after dinner, she sidled up next to me on the sofa. Aunt Tina, what do you do? Do you make things? I smiled at her interest. Yes, in a way. I make computer programs that help people communicate better. Like texting? She asked, her eyes wide. Something like that, but for businesses, I explained. She nodded solemnly. That sounds important. Daddy is always talking about communication problems at his work. I couldn't help but laugh. Your daddy is right about that. Communication is very important. For those few minutes talking with Emma, I felt more valued than I had all evening with the adults of my family. As the night wound down and everyone prepared to head to bed, I retreated to my old bedroom, now converted to a guest room with barely a trace of my childhood left. Sitting on the unfamiliar bed in my familiar room, I felt a complex mix of disappointment and determination. The day hadn't gone as I'd hoped, but there was still Christmas tomorrow. Perhaps the magic of Christmas morning and my carefully selected gifts would finally break through the walls between us. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. For a moment, lying in bed and hearing the distant sounds of children's excited voices, I felt a flash of childhood nostalgia. Then reality returned as I remembered where I was and the emotional distance that separated me from my family, despite our physical proximity. I rose early, determined to make one more effort to connect. In the kitchen, I began preparing a special breakfast, a family tradition that had somehow survived my mother's attempts to delegate it to the housekeeper in later years. French toast with caramelized apples, maple bacon, and my father's favorite fresh squeezed orange juice. The familiar motions of cooking were soothing, and I hoped the gesture would be appreciated. By 7:30, everyone had gathered in the kitchen, drawn by the delicious aromas. Noah's children bounced with excitement, already dressed in matching Christmas pajamas. Aunt Tina made breakfast, Emma announced proudly, as though she had been part of the planning. My mother surveyed the spread with a tight smile. How quaint. I had planned to serve the croissants from Lavelle's bakery, but this is fine too. This looks great, Tina, Ethan said, grabbing a plate and serving himself generously. My father nodded in agreement, though he seemed preoccupied with his phone, probably checking emails, despite the holiday. Noah and Julia murmured their thanks while serving their children. Madison took one bite of the French toast and declared, "Grandma's is better," earning a pleased smile from my mother. Well, I haven't made this in years, I said lightly, trying not to let the comment sting. It's yummy, Emma whispered to me, conspiratorially, and once again I found myself grateful for this small child's unfiltered kindness. After breakfast, everyone gathered in the living room around the 12-foot Christmas tree that dominated the space. Presents were piled underneath, wrapped in coordinating paper that reflected my mother's meticulous attention to aesthetic detail. My gifts, wrapped in paper I had brought from San Francisco, stood out slightly from the carefully curated collection. "Time for presents," my mother announced, clapping her hands together. She had always appointed herself as the distributor of gifts, controlling the pace and order of opening. Children first, of course. Noah's kids tore into their presents with abandon, squealing with delight at each new treasure. They received an abundance of gifts from my parents, everything from the latest electronic gadgets to expensive clothing. The pile of open-ended presents grew steadily around them. "And these special ones are from Aunt Tina," my mother said, handing them the packages I had brought. Madison opened her custom art set with a polite thank you, though her eyes had already moved on to the next gift. Thomas was more enthusiastic about the coding robot I had chosen specifically to nurture his interest in science. But it was Emma who reacted with genuine joy to the interactive globe I had given her, immediately asking me to show her where I lived in California. Next came the adults' turn. My father received several expensive ties, golf accessories, and books from my mother and brothers. When he opened my gift, the vintage Omega watch, his eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. "This is quite something," he said, examining it carefully. "Must have cost a pretty penny." "It's from the 60s, I explained, "the era you always talk about." He nodded, looking at me with what seemed like new consideration. Thank you, Tina. It's very thoughtful. My mother received silk scarves, perfume, and a spa package from the others. When she opened my gift, the Tiffany bracelet, she gasped audibly. My goodness, she said, lifting it from the box. This is certainly extravagant. You once mentioned wanting one like it, I said. I remembered. A flash of something crossed her face, recognition perhaps, or discomfort at being known so well by the daughter she had kept at a distance. It's lovely, thank you, she said, placing it back in the box rather than putting it on. Ethan was genuinely moved by both the check and the model of his building. Tina, this is incredible, he said, examining the detailed model and the investment. We need to talk about this. It's too much. It's not, I assured him. I believe in what you're doing. Noah and Julia were speechless when they opened the envelope containing the Italy trip details. We couldn't possibly accept this, Julia stammered, though her eyes betrayed her desire to do exactly that. Consider it making up for missed birthdays and Christmases, I said with a smile. Plus, I'd love to see pictures of the kids experiencing Rome for the first time. As the gift opening continued, I noticed something strange. Everyone had opened multiple presents, including my gifts to them, but nothing had been handed to me. The pile under the tree dwindled until only a few small packages remained, none of which were directed my way. An awkward silence fell over the room as the realization dawned that I was the only one without gifts. I felt my cheeks grow warm with embarrassment and hurt, but I maintained my composure, determined not to show how deeply this exclusion wounded me. Emma, with a child's innocent directness, broke the silence. Where are Tina's presents? My mother let out a sharp, uncomfortable laugh. Oh, we forgot you, she exclaimed, as though my absence from the gift exchange was a minor oversight rather than a glaring omission. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Well, we weren't sure you were coming until recently. Noah avoided eye contact entirely, suddenly very interested in helping Thomas with his new toy. Julia gave me a look that might have been intended as sympathetic, but came across as pitying. Ethan was the only one who seemed genuinely distressed. This is ridiculous, he muttered. I have something for you, Tina. It's just not wrapped yet. But his hasty assurance only underscored the reality. No one had thought to get me anything. After 5 years away, returning with thousands of dollars worth of thoughtful gifts, I was still an afterthought in my own family. The room had grown tense, everyone waiting for my reaction. I could see it in their eyes. They expected tears, perhaps, or an angry outburst. My mother's slight smirk suggested she might even have been anticipating a scene, some confirmation that I was still the emotional, overlooked little sister, desperate for attention. In that moment, looking at their expectant faces, something crystallized within me. This wasn't an oversight. This was a message, and suddenly, I knew exactly how to respond. The silence in the room was deafening as everyone waited for my reaction. I could feel the weight of their stares, some concerned, others almost eager to witness my breakdown. This was the moment that would define not only this Christmas, but perhaps our family dynamic moving forward. I took a deep breath and did the last thing they expected. I smiled. It's okay, I said calmly. Look what I got myself. With deliberate movements, I reached for my phone and opened my photo gallery. The confusion on their faces was palpable, everyone frozen in anticipation of what would come next. I've been meaning to share some news with you all, I continued, my voice steady and confident. Since none of you have really asked about my life these past few years, I thought now might be a good time for an update. I handed my phone to my father first, showing him photos of the headquarters of my tech company in San Francisco, a stunning modern building with my company's logo prominently displayed on the facade. This is my company, Adaptive Tech. We created a revolutionary AI communication platform that's now being used by over half of the Fortune 500 companies. I swiped to the next photo showing me shaking hands with some of the most recognizable CEOs in the technology sector. These are some of our clients. My father's expression transformed from confusion to stunned disbelief. He handed the phone to my mother, who squinted at the images with growing awareness. 3 months ago, I continued, as the phone made its way around the family circle, we finalized an acquisition deal. A major tech conglomerate purchased Adaptive Tech for $820 million. The sharp intake of breath from Noah was audibly satisfying. Julia's jaw quite literally dropped. Of course, as founder and majority shareholder, a significant portion of that came to me. I spoke matter-of-factly, as though discussing the weather rather than a life-changing financial event. After taxes and distributing shares to my employees, I walked away with just over $300 million. $300 million, my father repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I confirmed. But the money isn't what I'm most proud of. I took my phone back and swiped to another set of photos showing a modern building with Caldwell Foundation on its entrance. This is the philanthropic organization I established last month. We're focused on providing tech, education, and entrepreneurial support to young women from underprivileged backgrounds. I looked directly at my mother as I added, girls who, like me, might have potential that others fail to recognize. The pointed comment hit its mark. My mother's face flushed, but she remained speechless. The foundation has already awarded 60 full college scholarships and funded 15 women-led startups. We're just getting started, but Forbes has already recognized us as one of the most promising new philanthropic ventures in the country. I swiped to show them the magazine cover featuring me with the headline, Tech's New Philanthropic Powerhouse. In fact, I added, enjoying the stunned expressions around me, that's where I'll be heading after Christmas. I'm receiving an award in New York and then flying to London to open our first international office. Little Emma, who had been following the conversation with the intense concentration only a child can muster, piped up, "You're in a magazine? Are you famous, Aunt Tina?" I smiled at her. "Not exactly famous, sweetheart. Just doing work that matters." Ethan was the first to recover. "Tina, this is incredible. Why didn't you tell us?" I met his gaze steadily. "When exactly should I have told you? During the 5 Christmases I wasn't invited to, or yesterday at dinner when everyone was too busy talking about Noah's promotion to ask me a single question about my life? Noah had the decency to look embarrassed. We had no idea." "No, you didn't," I agreed, "because none of you ever asked." I turned to show them more photos, this time of my home, a stunning modern house overlooking the Pacific Ocean. This is where I live now, 6 bedrooms, an infinity pool, and an art collection that was featured in Architectural Digest last spring. I swiped again to show my garage containing 3 luxury vehicles, and these are what I drive, depending on my mood. The Tesla you saw outside is just my rental for this trip. My father stared at the images, his expression a mix of astonishment and what looked surprisingly like regret. My mother, however, was trying to regain her composure. "Well," she said with forced brightness, "it seems you've done very well for yourself, though I do hope all this money and attention hasn't made you forget the importance of family and settling down. Success isn't everything after all." It was a classic Margaret Caldwell maneuver, trying to reframe my achievements as somehow lacking because they didn't fit her narrow definition of what a woman should prioritize. 5 years ago, I might have been wounded by her attempt to diminish my success. Today, I merely found it amusing. "Actually, Mother, I haven't forgotten about family at all. In fact, I've created one of my own, a team of brilliant, supportive people who value each other's contributions and celebrate each other's successes. As for settling down, I'm quite settled. My life is exactly what I want it to be." I paused, meeting each of their gazes one by one. And regarding success not being everything, I agree completely. Integrity, kindness, and recognizing the worth of others are equally important, values I had to learn largely on my own. The pointed comment landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the room. My mother's smile froze. My father looked down at his hands, and Noah suddenly became very interested in helping his son with a new toy. "I don't share all this to boast," I continued more gently. "I share it because for years I felt invisible in this family. I kept hoping that if I achieved enough, you might finally see me. Eventually, I realized I needed to see myself, to recognize my own worth rather than waiting for your approval." Emma, with a child's perfect timing, broke the tension by climbing onto my lap. "I like your house with the swimming pool. Can we visit you?" I hugged her. "Of course you can, sweetheart. I'd love that." My revelation had left the room in various states of shock. My father looked like he'd been hit by a truck, still processing the information. My mother was struggling between pride at having raised such a successful daughter and dismay at having her carefully constructed family hierarchy disrupted. Noah seemed torn between jealousy and newfound respect, while Julia was already calculating the social advantages of having a wealthy sister-in-law. Only Ethan appeared genuinely happy for me, raising his coffee mug in a small toast. "To Tina," he said, "the most successful Caldwell of us all." That simple acknowledgement, after years of being overlooked, felt better than I had imagined it would. The hours following my revelation were charged with emotional undercurrents. The family splintered into small groups, processing what they'd learned. My father retreated to his study. My mother busied herself in the kitchen, and Noah took his children outside to play in the snow. Ethan and I sat in the den, catching up properly for the first time in years. After about an hour, there was a soft knock on the den door. My father stood there looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Tina, could we talk in my study?" I followed him to the wood-paneled room that had always been his sanctuary. As a child, being summoned to the study usually meant I was in trouble. Today, the power dynamic was noticeably different. He closed the door and gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, but instead of taking his usual position behind it, he sat in the chair beside me. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Several, actually." I remained silent, allowing him the space to continue. "I've been thinking about what you said about never being seen in this family. You're right. Your mother and I especially, failed you." He rubbed his hand across his face. "There's no excuse, but there is an explanation, if you're willing to hear it." I nodded, surprised by his vulnerability. "Your mother and I, we had certain expectations for our children. For the boys, it was straightforward. Success in conventional fields, financial security, good marriages. But for you," he sighed deeply, "your mother had very specific ideas about what your life should look like. When you showed interest in technology and business, traditionally male domains, she worried. She pushed me to redirect you toward more suitable pursuits." "And you went along with it," I stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. "I did," he admitted. "It was easier than fighting her, and I told myself it was in your best interest. I was wrong." He looked directly at me. "I see that clearly now. You had a vision for your life that neither of us could understand, but that didn't give us the right to dismiss it." The frankness of his admission took me by surprise. My father had never been one to acknowledge mistakes. "When you left after college, your mother was convinced you'd struggle and come back home. When you didn't, when we heard rumors of your success through distant connections, she became defensive, as though your independence was a personal rejection of her values. I should have stood up to her, reached out to you independently. That's on me." I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, lingering hurt, but also a new glimmer of understanding. "Thank you for telling me this," I said finally. "It helps me make sense of things I've wondered about for years." He nodded, looking relieved. "Your success is extraordinary, Tina. I'm proud of you, not just for what you've achieved, but for how you did it on your own terms, despite our lack of support." He hesitated. "I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope we might have a chance to build something new going forward." The conversation with my father was just the beginning. Later that afternoon, I found myself alone in the kitchen with my mother as she aggressively rolled out pie dough for dessert. "So," she said without looking up, "you've done quite well for yourself." "Yes," I replied simply, "I have." She continued rolling, pressing harder than necessary. "I suppose you think we're terrible parents for not recognizing your potential." "I'm curious," I said, ignoring her defensive tone. "Were you really surprised by my success, or just surprised that I achieved it without your approval?" Her hand stilled on the rolling pin. For a moment, I thought she might lash out, but instead her shoulders slumped slightly. "Both, perhaps." She finally looked at me. "You were always different, Tina. Stubborn, independent. You reminded me so much of myself at your age, before I chose this life." That revelation stopped me cold. "What do you mean?" She sighed, wiping flour from her hands. "I had ambitions too. You know, I was accepted to medical school. My parents were horrified, insisted it wasn't feminine, that no man would want a wife more educated than himself." A bitter smile crossed her face. "I gave it up, met your father, became the perfect corporate wife and mother. When I saw the same spark in you, I thought I was protecting you from disappointment." By discouraging me at every turn, I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. By steering you toward a life with guarantees, she countered. What you were pursuing seemed so precarious. And yes, she admitted reluctantly, perhaps I was envious of your courage to pursue what I had abandoned. Her honesty, however belated, was disarming. I had never seen my mother as anything but the formidable, judgmental woman who had shaped my childhood. Recognizing her as someone with her own disappointed dreams and regrets added a dimension to our relationship I hadn't considered. We can't change the past, I said finally, but we could try for something better going forward. She nodded, a tentative truce established between us. The conversation with Noah was more straightforward. He caught me alone before dinner, looking uncharacteristically humbled. I've been a terrible brother, he admitted without preamble. I took for granted that I was the golden child, never questioning why you were treated differently. I should have stood up for you. Yes, you should have, I agreed, but we were all playing the roles assigned to us. You did what was expected, taking the path laid out for you. While you blazed your own, he said with newfound respect. I've spent my life trying to please Mom and Dad. You had the courage to disappoint them, and look where it got you. I smiled. It's never too late to make changes, Noah. Later, I found Ethan sitting alone on the back porch watching the sunset. He handed me a small, hastily wrapped package. I really did get you something, he said. It's not much compared to what you've achieved. Inside was a framed photo of the two of us from high school after I'd won that science competition. Ethan had his arm around me, both of us grinning widely. You're the only one who came to that competition, I remembered. He nodded. I was always proud of you, Tina. I just wasn't brave enough to stand against the family current. He looked at me earnestly. I want to be a better brother moving forward. Perhaps the most touching moment came from little Emma, who approached me with a crayon drawing. I made you a present, Aunt Tina, she said solemnly. It's you and me at your swimming pool. I knelt down to hug her. This is the best gift I've received in years. She looked up at me with her innocent eyes. Grandma was wrong to forget you. I won't ever forget you. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. That evening, I gathered everyone in the living room for an announcement. I have one more surprise, I said. I recently made an investment that's particularly meaningful to me. I handed my father an envelope. Inside were the deed and keys to our childhood home. You bought our house? My mother gasped. Not exactly, I clarified. I established a trust that will maintain ownership of this property for our family in perpetuity. No matter what financial challenges may come, this home will remain in the Caldwell family. My father looked at the papers in disbelief. Tina, this is extraordinary. But why? Because despite everything, this is where our family story began. I want to preserve that history while giving us the chance to write better chapters going forward. I looked around at their faces. I have one condition, though, that we treat each other with respect and genuine care, that we see and value each person for who they truly are, not for who we want them to be. One by one, they nodded in agreement. The remainder of Christmas Day unfolded differently than any Caldwell family gathering I could remember. There was an authenticity to our interactions that had been missing for decades, perhaps even generations. The walls of pretense and performance had begun to crumble, revealing glimpses of the people my family members truly were beneath their carefully constructed facades. Dinner that evening was a more relaxed affair. My mother allowed me to help in the kitchen without criticizing my technique. My father asked genuine questions about my company and foundation, listening intently to my answers. Noah's children warmed up to me, especially after I promised to help Madison set up a simple website for her school project. As we gathered around the table, I noticed small gestures that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. My mother wore the bracelet I had given her. My father used his phone to research the history of his vintage watch, sharing interesting facts about it with genuine enthusiasm. Ethan and Noah engaged me in conversation about potential collaboration opportunities, their interests sincere rather than opportunistic. After the children were put to bed, my parents somewhat sheepishly presented me with hastily wrapped gifts, a silk scarf my mother had originally bought for herself, and a first-edition book from my father's collection. The presents themselves were less significant than the gesture, the acknowledgement of their oversight and attempt to rectify it. The most meaningful gift, however, came later that evening when my mother handed me a sealed envelope. I wrote this while you were talking with your father, she explained, uncharacteristic uncertainty in her voice. I thought it might be easier to express some things in writing. In privacy, I read her letter. a heartfelt apology acknowledging years of dismissal and unfair treatment. She wrote about her own abandoned dreams and how she had projected her fears onto me. The letter ended with a request not for forgiveness, which she felt she hadn't earned, but for the opportunity to build a different kind of relationship moving forward. That night, lying in my childhood bed, I reflected on the day's events. The hurt and neglect I had experienced were real, and no single day of reckoning could erase those wounds. Yet, something had shifted. The truth had been spoken aloud, acknowledged, rather than denied. It wasn't a Hollywood ending with all issues magically resolved, but it was a beginning, one built on honesty rather than pretense. In the days that followed, before I returned to San Francisco, we began establishing new patterns of interaction. I spent time teaching Emma how to use the interactive globe, showing her the places I had traveled for business. I had coffee with Ethan, discussing his architectural vision and how my foundation might support some of his community-focused projects. Even Noah made efforts, awkwardly but sincerely, to connect without competition or judgment. My parents, too, were different, more present, more willing to listen than to direct. My father asked for my input on some investment decisions, valuing my business acumen. My mother shared stories about her early ambitions, revealing a woman I had never known existed. As the time for my departure approached, I made a decision. "I'd like to invite all of you to San Francisco this summer," I announced at our final dinner together. "We could spend time at my home and I could show you the foundation's work." The enthusiastic response surprised me. Plans were made, dates tentatively set. There was an eagerness for connection that I hadn't anticipated. On my last morning, as my father helped load my luggage into the rental car, he paused. "You know, Tina, I've been thinking about what real success means. For years, I measured it in promotions and portfolio values, but watching what you've built, not just your company, but the way you've maintained your integrity and compassion through it all, it's made me reconsider many things." His words touched me deeply. "It's taken me time to understand that too," I admitted. For years, I drove myself to succeed, partly to prove my worth to this family. Eventually, I realized that true success isn't about external validation. It's about being aligned with your own values and using your gifts in ways that matter. He nodded thoughtfully. "You've taught all of us something important, though we were supposed to be the ones teaching you." As I drove away from my childhood home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The journey of healing had only just begun, but the hardest step, acknowledging the truth, had been taken. The empire I had built professionally had brought me financial security and recognition, but I was now beginning to build something potentially more valuable. An empire of authentic relationships, not ones based on performance and conditional approval, but on genuine acceptance and respect for each person's unique path. I had gone from being the forgotten daughter to the successful entrepreneur, but neither identity fully defined me. I was Tina, a woman who had learned through difficulty that her worth wasn't dependent on others' recognition, who had found the strength to stand in her truth while still extending the possibility of reconciliation. The greatest gift I received that Christmas wasn't wrapped in paper or acknowledged with fanfare. It was the realization that I no longer needed my family's approval to feel complete. Yet I could still open my heart to the possibility of a renewed connection on healthier terms. Perhaps that's the most valuable empire anyone can build. Not one of wealth or achievement, but of self-knowledge, boundaries, and the courage to offer second chances without compromising one's dignity. So I ask you, have you ever had to stand in your truth when others couldn't see your value? What empire are you building in your own life? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' recognition. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your value isn't diminished by someone else's inability to see it.